Today, we have a great conversation with Easton Freeze of A to Z Sports Nashville, who recently sat down with Brian Callahan for an extended interview. We've got a couple of questions for Easton about what he thought of some of Callahan's answers. We're also talking about how the Titans should attack the quarterback position, what they are looking for, what their scouting process and timeline looks like, and how last year's team may affect what Brian Callahan values in a quarterback. We're also going through the staff changes that happened a couple days ago, as well as the new hires in the front office. Jam-packed interview here with Easton Freeze. We're excited to get going. This is the Music City Audible. Let's get to it. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me, as always, Justin Melo and Justin. We've been doing a thing lately where we tape an interview a few days in advance so that we have stacked content coming out, and then the Titans keep doing things. They keep hiring people. They make staff changes. They have Brian Callahan sitting down with one of our buddies who we have to talk about it with him now. So I've been teasing the Cam Ward focused podcast for like 2 or 3 weeks now, and it's not today, as you can probably tell if you clicked on this podcast or video. It's coming soon. I think early next week is when we will drop the Cam Ward podcast. So today we have Easton Freeze on. Super excited to talk to him about his conversation with Callahan, where the Titans are at in the scouting process, what they're looking for in a quarterback, the staff changes, and of course what he would do if he was picking number one. How's it going, Justin?
I'm doing well, man. This was a great convo with Easton Freeze. We kind of reorganized the release schedule, as you said, putting this one out first just because it's so relevant, the conversation that Easton had with the quarterbacks. And, you know, they're en route to Mobile. The Titans were at the East-West Shrine where they met with Shedeur Sanders in person for the first time of what will probably be a couple times throughout this process. So this is all very relevant right now. And we learned a lot from Easton through his appearance here and through that interview he did with Callahan regarding what the Titans may or may not be looking for at quarterback this offseason. Really, really helpful to our process.
Absolutely. So we are excited to get into this conversation. Should we just get to it? Anything else you need to say first?
Let's bring Easton on.
All right. Without further ado, it's time to welcome in our guest, Easton Freeze, former writer for Broadway Sports Media. Not just writer, director of content for Broadway Sports Media, now over at A to Z Sports. Easton, thanks for joining us today. How's it going?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Joining you from the car en route to Mobile, headed to the Senior Bowl. So I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully I sound and look all right for the show, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is, I think, a great backdrop here. Easton doing the hard grinding right now, driving down to Mobile with Sam Phelan behind the wheel. So some crossover action happening here. The A to Z fam going down to Mobile. It's great. And speaking of A to Z, Easton, I want to start this by talking about your recent interview with Brian Callahan. If anybody missed it, came out at the end of last week, last Friday, with Easton just sat down for 90 minutes or so with Brian Callahan. You can find that on the A to Z Sports Nashville YouTube channel, youtube.com/@A to Z Sports Nashville. Highly encourage every Titans fan, go check this interview out, because I thought you got Callahan talking very naturally and openly, and just had a nice organic conversation. But there were a few comments. I don't want to spoil the whole interview. Tell everyone to go watch it right now. But there were a couple comments I want to focus on here and get your sort of take on now that you've had a chance to digest, and maybe some things you wouldn't have said directly to Brian in response to what he was saying. But starting with the comments he made about the quarterback position and specifically what he's looking for, can you tell us, in your words, sort of what you learned about what Callahan values most in the quarterback position and how he might be looking for those skills this offseason?
Yeah, we kind of addressed this in two separate buckets in the interview, one in the middle of the interview and one at the end. And the thing that stuck out to me in the middle, it kind of came up naturally in the middle of the interview, because we were talking about Will Levis. And my question wasn't really even geared towards what you want in your future quarterback. He kind of just took it in that direction. I asked him, when you misevaluate a prospect, like the Titans did with Levis, that he didn't draft him, obviously, but his perception of what he could have done coming into the year, obviously not true to what actually happened. So I asked him, when you misevaluate like that, how does it impact your ability to scout the position going forward? Does it change the way that you look at certain things? And his answer was, I think, really informative to what he's looking for this season, these next couple of months in the Titans' next quarterback. And it was kind of a subtweet of Will Levis, in the sense that he said the number one trait he's looking for right now in quarterbacks is what their nervous system is. And the way he described it was, how does the guy operate? How does he think in times of stress? How does his ability to play change depending on the situation around him? Kind of in line with the idea of tractor quarterbacks and trailer quarterbacks, right? Is this guy are we going to win because of him, or are we going to win with him? And the example he used was Jaden Daniels, who, when he said nervous system and started to break that down, the number one thing that came to my mind, and I'd imagine a lot of listeners' minds, was Jaden Daniels was the greatest recent example of this. The guy somehow gets cooler and calmer under worse circumstances. That's kind of his superpower, and everybody sees that that's watched him this year. And so obviously, everybody's looking for that guy. You want that guy that is super cool under duress, and it's easier said than done to find them. And one of the questions that we're hoping to be able to ask him when we get down here to Mobile, and it's the number one thing I wish, having listened to the interview back, if I could go back and add a question, the number one thing would be a follow-up to that and ask him, how exactly do you look for that? How do you test for that in a pre-draft process, right? And it's probably easier said than done. But how can that not be about Will Levis, right? That entire answer from him alluding to what he wants to see in a guy that has a positive nervous system. If you watch the Titans this year, the whole time he's answering, you're thinking about Will Levis and how his nervous system is the opposite of what you want, unfortunately. And he breaks down under stress, and his ability to create is there physically in his body, but between the ears, it goes haywire when things are wrong. And obviously, that's his answer, is he's kind of tilted away from guys like that because he had to deal with it all year long. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and on the second, sort of a follow-up to that, there was a separate conversation you were having with Callahan, or a separate, question you asked about what things sort of went wrong. If you could change one thing about how the season went, what would you change? And he mentioned the first two games and how those two games looked like wins halfway through the game, 3/4 of the way through the game, and then became losses. And it wasn't directly related to what you're talking about, but it is at the same time, because it was Will Levis breaking down in those moments and having like a panic turnover that flipped the whole script of the game and caused the Titans to lose. So,
yeah, man.
I totally agree. The nervous system thing, like as we scout these quarterbacks and we look at guys like Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, both of them pretty calm under pressure. I feel like both of them good at extending plays and keeping their eyes downfield. So that's a conversation we can have at a later date about who it applies to more. But some of the other traits he mentioned were timing, accuracy, decision-making. And I feel like he really harped on those three, which as a personal major Cam Ward supporter, I started to be like, oh, that sounds a lot more like Shedeur Sanders than Cam Ward.
Right.
But then you mentioned you circled back to this at the end of the interview. And at that point, he really started going into more detail about the ability when things break down. Can you buy time in the pocket? Can you extend plays? Can you create big explosives out of structure? That starts to sound more like Cam Ward based on your sense of, from talking to him. And he wouldn't really give you a straight answer on what's more valuable. He was like, well, it depends on the prospect. But to me personally, I've come to just think that the ability to create out of structure and turn what could be a negative play or a good play by the defense into a huge explosive play for your offense is the most valuable. And I wonder when Callahan said, if they're really good in other areas, it can make up for a deficiency in accuracy, timing, or decision-making. I wonder if the superhuman ability that we see from all four quarterbacks who made it to the conference championship, the ability to create out of structure, if that outweighs maybe the accuracy, timing, decision-making side, or one of those three, if there's a flaw there. What was your read on it? Obviously, sort of guessing because he didn't give you the straightest answer, but what was your read on how he values all those traits?
Yeah, this is the most interesting thing to me. It's the thing I've been thinking about the most the past couple of days. I would imagine I'm going to spend the next 3 months thinking about it. You're right that my personal philosophy is that it is in line with you, and I imagine anybody else that's watching, that ability to create, like we saw in the divisional round, in the conference championship round, is the most valuable thing you can have as a quarterback. But what Callahan was talking about, alluding to, and what I'm kind of thinking about as well now is, while it's the most valuable, I'm not sure it's the most important. And what I mean by that is my conversations with him on this interview, but also just all year long, and kind of getting a feel for how I think he views the quarterback position. I think that he feels like, I think there's some validity in this, we maybe have jumped the shark just a little bit in terms of draft and prospect analysis when it comes to how we value those abilities, that superhuman ability to create, superhuman ability to be the biggest athlete that can run players over, who have the strongest arm, are kind of a superlative culture we have in draft analysis. And if you don't have a superlative where it's like, wow, he's got the best arm I've ever seen, wow, he's the fastest or the strongest I've ever seen, we're kind of less interested in you. I think that he thinks that's jumped the shark a little bit. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong. He brings up the point, like you said, that I asked him, what are your non-negotiables for quarterback? And he said decision making, timing, and accuracy. And those are very standard pocket passery, Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud style things, right? That's not somebody that is doing the most, doing everything, carrying a team on their back. That's somebody that's executing the offense. And that's something that was interesting to me. We heard from Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker on Wednesday, and I was there at the introductory press conference, and kind of offhand, Borgonzi spoke about quarterback, and he gave kind of a stock answer of, you want a guy that can create and he can win in the biggest moments. His answer was very much, it sounded like Cam Ward to me, more than Shooter Sanders. And then I'm sitting there thinking, we'll wait until everybody hears on Friday what Brian Callahan has to say, because I know what he has to say sounds more like Shooter Sanders. And so I think that it's about finding a balance there. But the idea ultimately that I'm most interested in right now is, have we kind of gone overboard in our valuing those superlative traits over is that kind of a 201 thing, if you get what I'm saying? Is that something where you have to have these non-negotiable decision-making, timing, and accuracy abilities in order to then stack on top of that your 201, 301 level, ability to create? Because if you focus only on those superlatives and not the fundamental things that Callahan wants to be able to execute your offense, that's how you end up with guys like Anthony Richardson and Trey Lance and these guys who the promise was always there on paper, but it feels like you kind of skipped a step in basic quarterbacking.
No, that's a terrific point, Easton. I think that really is going to help us with the quarterback evaluations over these next couple of months, at least into thinking how the Titans are going to evaluate the quarterbacks. I want to take this convo quickly to some recent happenings. Two-part question. First one, Easton, some familiar names joining the front office. Dave Ziegler hired as assistant general manager, and Reggie McKenzie, former Tennessee Volunteer, in a senior scouting role. Of course, McKenzie was a candidate for GM, one of the 10 candidates, I believe, the Titans identified at the beginning of their search. First part, kind of what you take about those two additions, and if you think that's more of a Chad Brinker thing, a Mike Borgonzi thing, were they aligned in that? And then we'll get into some of the staffing changes as well.
So off the top, I think it does have to be a Brinker and Borgonzi thing, just because of the connection that Brinker has with them. The fact that Brinker, leading the GM search, identified one of them in terms of a candidate they had come in, and both guys with experience, specifically with the Raiders, which is funny. It's kind of a glass half full, glass half empty thing, where glass half full, the Titans now have 3 either current or former GMs in their front office. There is an experience element there that is legitimately valuable. And that's something that I think maybe we saw a little bit of this past year, where the Titans, not just in the front office, but really the coaching staff, and you're seeing Callahan kind of remedy that a little bit recently. The lack of experience maybe showed through a little bit here and there. This team does not lack experience in the front office right now. They have seen it all. And I think that's something that can't be over valued. However, glass half empty, there's a reason these guys are former GMs, right? And you look at their most recent track record at the controls, when they were the ones calling the shots. You've got stories of like drafting the wrong Byron Young in 2022 and all of or Byron Murphy and all these things. So it depends on. I think it's a Rorschach test for whether or not you just want to be a hater or if you're wanting to be an optimist, how you view these additions. I ultimately personally lean more towards the experience is helpful and useful, and they aren't the ones ultimately calling the shots. Borgonzi is. They're going to be agents of him and his vision. And I think if you trust Borgonzi, having that experience under him is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing here. A lot of people want to look at the records that these two guys had in their various GM stints of their own, but I think it's more about, you got a first-time GM. He's the one making the scouting calls and everything, but everything else that goes into being a GM, he's never handled all of those responsibilities before. It's great to have two guys who have done it at a high level and for years that he can sort of lean on, something Brian Callahan did not do when he put together his initial coaching staff outside of, a couple of linebacker coaches, I think, or a couple of defensive assistants. I also want to ask you about the something else you mentioned with Brian Callahan, or he mentioned in your interview, the scouting process and sort of the timeline, because on the subject of Brinker and Borgonzi, Brinker said at the press conference, "We won't pass on a generational talent with the first pick in the NFL draft." And the aggregators and even bigger media personalities than just the aggregators have taken this. I think Adam Schefter went on a Patriots podcast or radio show and said, "To me, it sounds like the Titans are taking Travis Hunter." And it's like, what are you talking? Someone else comes out and says, no. I think Benjamin Albright came out and said, no, the Titans were actually talking about Abdul Carter, not Travis Hunter.
Right.
It's like, I just get so baffled by how these people can take a quote at the GM's introductory press conference as if they have their plan solidified for what they're going to do at number one. And take the timing out of it. Let's say they did. He's going to come out in January and tell the world what their plan is?
Right. Let's just go ahead and telegraph it immediately and show our hands. Makes total sense.
So I just think this is the dumbest story that could possibly get aggregated, and Titans fans are freaking out like, oh, we're not going to take a quarterback, and people across the league like, oh, look out, the Titans are going to take Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter.
Only you're freaking out about not taking a quarterback. I don't think anyone else would be freaking out.
A lot of fans are freaking out, and I definitely think they should take a quarterback. But let's just clear the air on this.
Some freak out at the idea that they are going to take a quarterback.
That's true.
So it's not to the point.
But if we needed to clear the air here and reference what Brian Callahan told you, and then also just use a little bit of logic and reasoning of our own, the Titans scouting timeline, where are they at now, or where were they on January 20th, I guess, when you actually talked to Brian Callahan, and how is that going to evolve over the next few weeks as we close in on February and the Combine, to the point where, like, when do you think they will have a better idea of who they're targeting with that first pick?
Yeah, the short answer is where they're at right now is nowhere close to knowing what they're doing, which is good. And if they were anywhere close to knowing what they're doing right now, that's a bad front office and a bad coaching staff and a bad team. So, you're right that everybody took it and ran with it. And actually, I posted about this on A to Z Sports yesterday about how I think this is simply just a messaging approach that broadens their horizons. It's something that Chad Brinker said twice on Wednesday pretty deliberately. It's the kind of thing that I think is not an accident. I think it's intentional messaging from a team that, you're right, the GM is still unpacking boxes in his office. Of course, they have no idea who they're taking. However, if you know the landscape at the top of this draft, which the Titans do, Chad Brinker does, and you know that there is no position that is easier to entice somebody to spend a little too much to come up and get them in a trade than quarterback, which is true. And there are two of those guys that are options for that, depending on if other teams fall in love with them. But you also know that the landscape of this draft at the top is it's not a surefire quarterback number one overall year. And there are two guys that other teams in the league may see as certainly blue chip players. Generational talent is a word that's thrown away too much, but seen as these guys that can't miss at the very top. Then why not signal to those teams, hey, by the way, if you're thinking the Titans are surely taking a quarterback and one of these guys is going to fall to you at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, think again, because we might take them. And if you want them, you better call us up to come and get them. That's good process. That's a good job in January to make that clear to the rest of the league and use the useful idiots in aggregation to get that message out that actually you're taking Travis Hunter. Actually, make the rest of the league think you're taking all 4 players so that if anybody else wants them, they come and get them. Now, where they're at right now, actually, as Brian explained on January 20th when we did the interview, was the front office is far ahead of the coaching staff. Coaching staff really starting in earnest this week with the All-Star games. And, Callahan and Denard and Nick Holtz are all three at the Shrine Bowl. They're traveling today to the Senior Bowl like we are. They'll be down there. And we'll actually, I think those of us in the national media will get a chance to speak with them briefly tomorrow on some things. They're just now starting watching these guys and forming opinions, the coaching staff. So their input is massively valued, especially if you're making a decision as big as quarterback at the top of the draft. Your coaching staff needs to be aligned with that 100% if you're going to pull the trigger. The front office, the area scouts are in. They're starting to put their board together in the sense they're aggregating like character stuff that the guys on the ground have gotten on different players, medical information, measurements, starting to put together the big picture. But they are far from having like all-encompassing meetings about having finished looking at different players, full front office, arguments over the validity of certain players at the top of the draft. Like they're not to that process of really making any kind of decision. The dirty little secret that kind of ruins drafts intrigue for some people, but I think it's valuable to know as a fan, is that when you hear insider draft info, it's almost all entirely useless until about 2 weeks before the draft, because that is when front offices and coaching staffs get together, do their final meetings, do their final big board prep. It's right at that 2 week pre-draft, T-minus 2 weeks mark. Everything inside of that 2 weeks is liable to be good and real information. There's still some lying that goes on, obviously, but everything before that T-minus 2 weeks is either people making stuff up or they have bad info.
Easton, we've appreciated your time, but before we let you go, we're going to put you on the spot and about where you're at in your process. If you were Mike Borgonzi and you didn't have to answer to Chad Brinker and had the number one pick in the draft, what would you be doing this year?
Oh man, I am much like the Titans. I am not in a place to responsibly give a definitive answer yet. I've watched a lot of these top four guys, the two quarterbacks, and then Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. I've watched a lot of them on Saturdays. And so I have an opinion from the television tape on these guys. I like all four of them a lot, some more than others. I am, based on the TV copy, more of a Shedeur Sanders than a Cam Ward guy for this offense in particular.
Boo.
But something that I know. I think both are pretty imperfect prospects, and my opinion is subject to change on them when I get to dive into their advanced metrics more and watch their tape more, which will happen. I'll pretty much do all of that in the next month. But the thing for me right now is I think the Titans are in a really good space to not make an indefensible decision, which is good. I think any of these four players are worthy first overall picks. The quarterbacks, maybe you have an argument with, but my point being, if they are convicted enough to spend a first overall pick on one of these quarterbacks and pass on the other two who are definitively blue chip prospects, I think Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter both are first round worthy pick players. If you're that convicted as the Titans, then I think that is an understandable and defensible decision to make it one. Well, let's see you make it work, right? So I'm excited to see how they find a way to mess it up, because I don't think that they can.
Yeah, totally. I think you made great points there, Easton, and we really appreciate your time here. Again, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, go watch Easton's interview with Brian Callahan. I guarantee you will not regret it, on the A to Z Sports Nashville YouTube channel. Also available as a podcast if you're into that sort of thing. But I think watching it is more engaging. You get a sense of Callahan's facial expressions and the sense of like you guys were really just talking ball. I think it's super cool that you got the opportunity to do that. So congrats to you, Easton.
And Easton's got great hair in the video too.
True.
So if you only listen to the podcast, you're going to miss out on the hair shot.
Very true.
That's right. That's what's important here.
You guys have fun down there in Mobile. Drive safe. Tell Sam to drive safe, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Take care, guys.
Bye. All right. Thanks again to Easton Freeze for his time there. Just on the road to Mobile, stopping to do a podcast. Not a bad way to pass the time when you have a long drive ahead, but good for him. Good for Sam getting down there to cover that stuff. But Justin, I messed up something in that interview, and I want you to know that I'm sorry. So you said you had a two-part question for Easton. You're going to ask him about the hires in the front office and then the staff changes. You asked him about the hires. You had a follow-up coming, and I jumped in with our next question. Totally missed that. You hadn't got to the staff changes yet. So let's talk about it really quick right now. Now, we know this happened a few days ago, but we're getting to it today. So you want to talk through it? You want me to tee you up? What are you thinking? I think the biggest thing is that Colt Anderson, there was a lot of mystery around whether he was staying on in a lesser role or what was up with that. He has been dismissed. I'll just read through them, and then you tell me what's important, what we can comment on. Chris Harris, passing game coordinator and the cornerbacks coach. His contract ended, not going to be renewed. Justin Outen, the tight ends coach in 2024, contract also expired. Anthony Levine was a special teams assistant under Colt Anderson. His contract has also run out. He will not be extended. Titans had a defensive assistant who's taken a job with Vrabel in New England. Titans promoted Luke Stalker to tight ends coach. They've hired Tony Oden as the passing game coordinator, cornerbacks coach, replacing Chris Harris. And John Fossil, this new special teams coordinator, was officially announced. What stands out, Justin?
Obviously, Colt Anderson not coming back. I don't think anyone is going to be sad about that one. There was rumors he was going to stay in like a lesser role, probably like the Anthony Levine role, right? The assistant special teams role. That's not happening. Fossil's actually bringing someone with him. Raina Stewart is going to be the assistant special teams coach, was with him in Dallas. So that makes a lot of sense. Luke Stalker being promoted to tight end coach, that's something I think I'd speculated, I think privately, was probably going to happen, replacing Justin Otten. I think the big surprise for me in this is Chris Harris. That's when we kind of glazed over, but thought he's done a good job as cornerbacks coach. Certainly, this year missing L'Jarius Sneed and Cheeto Awuzie for so much. They didn't miss a beat, right? With like Jarvis Brownlee playing well, Darrell Baker playing well. It is worth noting Harris missed a couple games in the middle of the year due to personal reasons. Right. We don't know if that played a role in this or if it was just, mutual for them to go their separate ways. Tony Oden comes in, replaces him. Another thing that's minorly interesting to me, maybe because I'm a nerd, like cornerback / passing game coordinator don't exactly always go hand in hand. I thought that was pretty unique that Chris Harris held that role, yet they're doing the same thing with Tony Oden coming in with the same title. Bringing this guy in, he's got a good resume. He was with the Jets recently as a cornerbacks coach, coached Sauce Gardner down there. Great job with him. It kind of reflects Callahan's willingness again to just hire good coaches, ones that he doesn't necessarily know. Has never crossed paths, at least on the same staff with Oden. I checked. Same thing he did with Fossil, right? Bringing him in as the special teams coordinator, just trying to hire and find good coaches where you can get them. The last thing that sticks out to me, I'll say about it is, feels like all the guys that are leaving are Mike Vrabel holdovers, right? Yeah. Chris Harris was a Mike Vrabel holdover. Anthony Levine was a Mike Vrabel holdover. Chris Harris, the defensive line coach you mentioned, Clint McMillan, that's who's leaving to join Vrabel in New England. All these guys were Mike Vrabel holdovers. Probably not a coincidence. They've all, most of them, their contracts aligned, right? So Vrabel's contract, for example, if it could have expired, it would have been in line with these assistant coaches. All of them expired and they're not being renewed.
And Tony Oden was most recently with the Jets. I've seen a lot of tweets of Jets fans and people who cover the Jets sort of saying, dang, this is a big loss. This was one of the few good coaches they had on staff. I saw somebody say, and I don't know, did you mention him and Callahan having crossover?
I thought they didn't have crossover. So was that wrong?
They actually worked together on Jim Caldwell's Detroit Lions staff.
Oh, wow.
2016, 2017. So a couple seasons they did have a little bit of crossover, but obviously both of them in much lower roles than they are now into, obviously, for Callahan. But all in all, I think he's a good coach, and it seems like, he's coached some great defensive backs in New York. Sauce Gardner, who was the younger guy that came on this year, really played really well for them down the stretch.
DJ Reed's been pretty good throughout his time there. A couple good safeties, Jordan Whitehead.
Yeah, so he's has a similar background and level of acumen, I would say, and accomplishment that Chris Harris had when the Titans brought him in. So I don't it is a loss just because I think Chris Harris, like you said, did a great job, especially with the young DBs. Roger McCreary over the last few years, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. this year, Darrell Baker, getting him in and up to speed quickly enough to play significant amount of snaps. But I don't know that he will necessarily be that missed just because they have found a great candidate to replace him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was kind of sad to see Chris Harris go, but it seems like they've done a good job finding a replacement here.
Right. All right. That's it. Those are the staff changes. Again, all that stuff came out on Monday, so a couple of days old at this point, but we figured we might as well talk about it while we're here. And as I mentioned at the top of this episode, we have a guest coming on. Going to drop this early next week to tell Titans fans why they should want the team to draft Cam Ward. Justin Melo will provide the dissenting opinion, I believe. Are you still planning to provide the dissenting opinion?
I think that, I'm certainly not as on board as you are. That's for sure. So I think we'll have some fun with that.
There we go. So that'll be early next week. Stay tuned for that. And if you're not already, hit subscribe to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment below. What'd you think of Easton's thoughts? Did you watch the Callahan interview yet? Just let us know, yes or no. Anything helps the algorithm, right? Or just comment boosting the algorithm, or just comment tighten up. Whatever you want to comment it, please. And thank you. And we'll be back next week. So until then, You all stay safe out there and tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.